water loop.
Welcome to Waterloop, the nonprofit news outlet that explores solutions for sustainability and equity in water. I'm the host, Travis Loop. Amid the devastation of the Los Angeles wildfires, confusion and misinformation have surrounded the role of water resources. This episode clarifies key inaccuracies, highlighting how municipal water systems are designed to support localized firefighting efforts rather than large-scale wildfires fueled by extreme weather conditions. Kathryn Sorenson of Arizona State University's Kyle Center for Water Policy and Chad Seidel of Corona Environmental Consulting explore the limitations of current infrastructure and the evolving challenges posed by urban-wildland interface fires. Kathryn and Chad, so good to be with both of you. I've talked to you both in the past and known you for a number of years. Sorry we're kind of getting together during this major crisis with the wildfire in Los Angeles, but really excited to hear your information, your perspective, your knowledge around these issues. There's a lot to cover, but let's, I guess, talk first about the actual situation in Los Angeles. There's a lot of talk about water and the role in responding to the fire. There's a lot of, I think, inaccuracies out there, some misinformation, some disinformation. What do you know? What can you say about, I guess, the role of water and any of the challenges or any of the inaccuracies that are kind of involved in that Los Angeles situation? That's a big question, but we'll start there, I think.
So to start out in the big picture, municipal water distribution systems are really not designed or built to fight large wildfires. They are designed and built with the storage capacity necessary to fight, relatively localized, relatively small urban fires of a relatively short duration. So from the get-go, whatever the status or condition of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's water distribution system, it was never going to be enough to actually fight this wildfire. If there had been additional storage in the empty reservoir, that might have made, some difference. Probably not a huge one. I know that's a big topic of discussion, but I think it's really important for people to remember that these systems are designed to provide water pressures under normal operating conditions and relatively small urban fires. And to expect them to be able to fight a broad, long-lasting wildfires is not realistic.
Yeah, that's definitely something that you've heard is how did fire hydrants possibly run dry, right? You think about a fire hydrant on a street, like you said, that is there so the fire department can pull up, hook up, and put a structure fire out, not an entire neighborhood that's burning. And then you also probably have homeowners and business owners that were running hoses and tapping into the water, trying to save homes, and that compounded the situation too.
Yeah, it's you can imagine pretty much, every available fire hydrant was open, and that kind of draw on a system is extreme. There will be storage in these hillside pressure zones, but not enough water storage for, to open every single hydrant, every single hose, and still be able to maintain pressures.
Yeah, I would add that it's important to recognize that as we are experiencing more and more of these fires in what we call the wildland-urban interface, where you have things that can catch on fire that aren't in the urban area, but then it's immediately into an urban area, it means that our water systems are going to be experiencing those conditions. And so, our response to several of these fires over the last 5-10 years, most notably in my own community in Louisville, Colorado with the Marshall Fire just over 3 years ago, the way it plays out is that the water system is an active, integral part of the firefighting activity. But as the fire is progressing and firefighting resources are having to pull back as the fire is moving quickly, especially in the face of just extraordinary wind conditions, and it's really protecting life and human safety is so important, you end up in this condition where, water utility directors I've worked with call it, it's just death by 1,000 cuts, because as soon as one of those houses burns down and the piping inside that house is open to the atmosphere, it's now another source of water being consumed from the overall water system. And the water treatment plant that has to supply water to that can only supply enough of that water. Every one of those houses is taking 10, 20, 30, maybe even 50 gallons a minute of water. And because you can't just go and turn the valve off in front of the house, it's going to continue losing that water. And you can't necessarily retreat back to turn off the water to the pipe in front of the street until it's safe to do so. And so there are some practical limits to how municipal drinking water systems are intended to fight localized fires, can then be applied to firefighting in a much more intense, broad scale like this. Some really important lessons learned, and I do think those lessons were learned and have been used by folks fighting fires in the current context today. There's a limit to how much you can do. I mean, Mother Nature certainly comes and tells us what to do in those circumstances, and you do everything you can to protect people's lives in those cases.
I was going to say, Chad brings up a good point, though, that, if we're going to see more of these wildfires in the urban, forest interface, then, it is valid to question the storage capacity of these systems, to question whether they should be designed differently, whether there's more that we should do to be able to combat these types of situations, or at least mitigate them to some degree. But even there's some trade-offs, right? It is possible to build additional storage into these pressure zones that are on the urban wildlands interface, but there's a water quality trade-off that's really important to recognize if we decide to do that. We can have those types of conversations, and I think it's important to do so, but I think we do also have to understand the fundamental limitations and trade-offs associated with these systems.
You mentioned Mother Nature and these high winds, and that was obviously a factor, right? You have incredible winds that prevented a lot of the fighting the fire from the air with water and other retardants and so forth. So that was a big challenge. And then getting back to the water piece, you had a very dry period in that part of Los Angeles, 8 to 10 months where they have not had any soaking rain. Is that right?
Yeah, the parallels are strikingly similar between what's just been experienced in Southern California with what we experienced in Colorado with the Marshall Fire again 3 years ago. Virtually no rainfall in that 6-month period leading up till the end of December. And again, we're talking about wildfires the very end of December into January, where generally, historical record, those were either colder and less likely, or perhaps a little bit more wet and less likely. And the cruel reality in our condition with the Marshall Fire was the fire was effectively put out after 80 to 100 mile an hour winds caused it and really had it tear through our community. The winds calmed down, and the next day it got brutally cold and snowed on everything, which is, again, a very stark reality of the climate that we have to deal with. We are dealing with extremes. We're not dealing with norms. And so planning and responding in the face of those conditions takes different tactics than we've used historically.
Yeah, temperature, water, wind, all those things are whipping back and forth in an unprecedented manner and just complicating these challenges. I want to also ask about another piece we've heard with the Los Angeles wildfires is, all the water's been kept upstate in California, in Northern California, and has not been brought down to the Los Angeles area. Wanted to get your response to that criticism.
There are kind of two separate issues that are being conflated here. The performance of the local infrastructure in this condition is really independent of the regional reservoirs. LADWP, apparently had filled all of their storage tanks except for the one that was under repair. They had done what was necessary to prepare for this fire, and the performance of the infrastructure at the local level is very different and independent from the status of the regional reservoirs at the statewide level. But that being said, I do think there are some valid questions that we need to address, especially in the face of climate change, about the capacity of our reservoirs in the arid West, the number that we have, and their operations. Those regional reservoirs, for the most part, were all designed and built developed with operating criteria that are based on a wetter hydrology. And if we're looking at a future where we're going to see less precipitation for longer periods of time, but then potentially, be inundated with major rain events, major precipitation events, then we probably do need to take another look at the capacity of these reservoirs, the number of them, and the priorities for their operation. I think those are valid questions to ask, but that is really a very separate issue from the performance of the local infrastructure.
Yeah, because from what I've heard, those reservoirs in the area are fairly full. I mean, there has been a lot of rain and snow in California the past few years, and so I think that when it comes to the supply on hand, that there was enough water available. Again, it was more the local infrastructure that was the challenge here.
Yeah, in terms of the locale and what that means is it gets very, very specific. In our recovery efforts in Colorado, it actually got down to the cul-de-sac level, where getting water to some cul-de-sacs was perhaps the most difficult place for us to do it, because the way that the community was designed had fire hydrants at the point of entry into the cul-de-sac, but the houses that were burning down were at the end of the cul-de-sac. So as soon as one house burned down and it started having water kind of sucked back into the system, the houses next to it started having those problems. That has nothing to do with how water ultimately got to that point, which is from the source water reservoirs through water treatment plant or treatment plants, through pipe networks to those locations. And so every one of those layers are key parts of the overall infrastructure that we use, not only for supplying drinking water each and every day, which is a clear benefit to our communities, and we've got to maintain that, but then the off chance that you have to use it for fire protection too.
Let me just try to ask a yes or no question here, since I have two water experts on, and then
I'm not good at that, Travis, just so you know.
I'm trying to put you guys on the spot here, and then we'll back up to some bigger questions. So, was there a problem with water resources that led to the scale of damage in Los Angeles from these fires?
No, not that I'm aware of.
The key word there is scale, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that
you're getting away from that yes or no, Kathryn, but that's okay.
See, I told you, I warned you. I'm not good at this. I'm not good at this. I mean, like I said, there's a lot of discussion about the reservoir that was offline. And look, in a system the size of LADWP, I would expect that one or more reservoirs is offline for repair or maintenance at any given point in time, right? But it is possible that had that reservoir been online for this particular event, there might have been water for a slightly longer period of time. Maybe that would have made a difference for a particular home or business. So there is something there, but the key word is scale. And even had that reservoir been online, even had everything gone perfectly, with 100-mile-per-hour winds, the dry tinder that was all throughout the hillsides, I don't think it would have made a big difference.
Kathryn, given your background in municipal water management, utility management, what kind of debriefing or after action sit down do you expect is going to happen with water officials?
Certainly, this is not LADWP's first wildfire or fire experience, so they've done this before, but they will look at the performance of their crews, the performance of the infrastructure. They will look at the plans they had in place before the event occurred, how individuals responded during the event, and what can be done looking to the future. I would expect it to be a very thorough review. I'm sure there will be lessons that we can learn from. There will be failures. No utility operation is perfect. But I would expect it to be very thorough and take some time and be very careful and then look really to what that tells them in terms of being ready for the next one.
And Chad, what about the engineering side? What might it look like as they look at the system there and analyze that? What kind of debrief might there be on that front?
Yeah, operationally and engineering wise, there are some things that can be done to be better prepared and perhaps more resilient in the face of increasing wildfires, particularly those that are in that wildland urban interface where it's not just the hillside, but then it's the homes on the hillside, and then it's the water system infrastructure on the hillside. And a little bit of context historically, over my 25-year career and the impacts of wildfires, the first decade was focused on forest fires in the watershed. And actually, Kathryn had experience of water utilities being impacted by some of the very, very large-scale forest fires. Didn't burn any water infrastructure, but then those had impacts on the source water quality for the reservoirs and the canal systems that would lead to the municipal water treatment plants. So it changed the way they had to treat their water to meet public health expectations. Then more research started looking at, well, what happens if the fire burns our water treatment infrastructure, or it burns the piping in the distribution system? And then what happens when it burns our customers' buildings, whether it's homes or businesses? And so that latter part of the system is where the key questions, I think, have come, and where there will be a more keen look at what could be done to be more prepared and more resilient. Some examples of those, I mentioned before, it can be very difficult to turn off valves either in the distribution system or at buildings themselves, at the curb stop that connects the building to the pipe in the street. There are some communities that have put in effectively remote controlled valves that are connected, whether by Bluetooth or other technologies, to be able to do that without risking life to have to go physically and turn the valve key in front of it. Those are some examples there. The rest is just preparedness. And the water utility community has been doing this in a lot of ways. Like, how can we be prepared with generators that are either mobile as well as fueled by different things? So the fuel availability doesn't impact our ability to use generators to keep water pumping in the event of having a pump station burn down over here, but you still got to keep moving water over here. Those will be the types of things that I think where key questions will be asked, and we'll keep working on how to best prioritize investments to do what's best for our communities.
You mentioned the fires in Arizona. Kathryn, I'd like to just kind of pick up on that story a little bit and have you share what happened and how that impacted source water, because that's, again, a wildfire's up in the watershed, if you will.
There was a major wildfire on the watershed that supplies Salt and Verde River to the Phoenix area. And nothing really happened during the time of the fire because it was far enough away from the city itself that wasn't the problem. But then after the rains came subsequently, they washed all of this, mud down into the watershed, and there was nothing to stop that entering the canal system and heading straight for the surface water treatment plants. The surface water treatment plants were just not built to filter out that much turbidity in a quick enough manner to continue to supply water to the city. And so the city of Phoenix actually had to issue a boiled water alert to its entire service territory. So that it affected, well over 1 million people. It was a huge event. And subsequent to that, spent tens of millions of dollars upgrading its water treatment infrastructure to be able to better deal with turbidity, with high turbidity events in the future. So it had a real cost.
You've both mentioned some solutions here. I'd like to maybe kind of just continue down that lane and try to wrap up on that front. What are some things that you're seeing happen around the country with water systems, or some things you think should be happening around the country to continue to build resilience to the increasing wildfire risk?
I'll start with some of the key things. The first is recognizing the likelihood that this will impact your community. And that's an unfortunate reality that we all have to face now. Our office in Louisville, Colorado, having worked with the local water utility on a number of things, I would have never imagined that a wildfire would start 5 miles away, not up in the forest, but just in the grasslands, and it would race across those grasslands and then catch the entire community on fire. But I now, anywhere I go, look at the way our communities are built and can see places where we should expect a wildfire to possibly take root and start and cause significant damage. So we can't just say, well, that's not going to happen to me. Everywhere needs to look at it. Even the East Coast, the fires just in the last couple of months near New York City are impacting water systems in ways like what Kathryn just described with Phoenix, where it impacts source waters, where that was really unthinkable before. So we all have to recognize, yes, it can happen to my community. And then from there, it's, well, what role can I have to better prepare myself? What role can I be prepared for as a water utility member to be an active part of the emergency response preparedness? And then what can be done to make our systems more resilient in those ways? The last thing I'll say is just coming from a heart of being in a community that lost 1,000 homes and knowing what that's like, being willing to step in and walk alongside those that are experiencing that right now, because it is a real emotional burden that, as much as I get into the technical weeds, all that pales in comparison to the emotional challenges that it is for a community to respond. And so there it's come alongside people, walk with them to work towards recovery in terms of whatever that's going to look like. And some communities are better resourced than others, but everybody's come from that same heartbroken state of having lost.
Kathryn, your thoughts on solutions that are out there?
I think that there's a lot more we can do in terms of power redundancy, and Chad talked about this. I think it's really important. And oddly, there are not, for the most part, standardized rules or regulations about the level of power redundancy that these systems have. And that means typically it's up to each utility to decide how much power redundancy is appropriate, how much they can afford, how much they might need in different scenarios. But it's really important, right? Because in order to keep the water system functioning, you got to continue to move water. And that means having power for your pumps and power for your treatment plants. And that's an expensive and difficult proposition. But I think there's a lot there, and there's a lot more that we as an industry can and should do to ensure that these systems can continue to function in very extreme situations.
Great. Well, thank you both for coming on and responding and sharing your expert analysis and thoughts and knowledge on this, this challenge of wildfires, the situation in Los Angeles. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the podcast. To find all episodes, sign up for email updates, and follow us on social media, visit waterloop.org.